Next on Primary Care, food as medicine. Studies show that food can be an effective treatment in fighting and preventing chronic disease.
We know that food has the ability to nurture wellness and health, but it also has the ability to even progress some diet-related diseases.
Hello, I'm Dr. Lonnie Joe, and welcome to Primary Care, the show dedicated to the health and care of African Americans. Research shows that the foods we eat have a profound effect on our health and influence our risk for disease. While certain foods may trigger chronic conditions like type 2 diabetes and heart disease, others offer strong medicinal properties, leading many to believe that food is medicine. With the higher rates of chronic disease and obesity in African Americans, could prescribing food as medicine be part of an effective means to combat those conditions? Here to help us answer that question is Maria Conley. Ms. Conley is a registered dietitian nutritionist with the Henry Ford Health System. Her professional experience includes providing medical nutrition therapy for children and adults and advancing healthy eating and wellness initiatives in communities at risk for poor health. Ms. Conley, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Joe.
Maria, it's a pleasure to have you. Tell us about the science behind food as a medicine.
So the idea of food as medicine really tries to put emphasis on the way that foods can impact our body and our disease states. We know that food has the ability to nurture wellness and health, but it also has the ability to even progress some diet-related diseases. So that's really where that thought comes from.
So are we seeing more healthcare professionals buy into this philosophy of, we've always been taught, diet and exercise, you are what you eat. But what's happening most recently? We've got the country on a craze in terms of eating properly and whether it's one diet versus another. Yeah. Are we seeing the healthcare professionals buy into this approach?
I think so. I work at Henry Ford Health System, and I do feel like there is more and more interest in doctors looking for ways that they can provide nutrition education to their patients and ways that they can work alongside other specialties to help support the patient's health above and beyond just prescriptive medications.
So maybe that fits into the description of lifestyle medicine?
Definitely, definitely. We know that lifestyle medicine takes into account the things and the choices that we're doing on a daily basis. So what types of foods are we feeding our body? How are we moving our body with physical activity and exercise? How well are we managing our stress, as well as our sleep quality?
As a dietitian, how do you help patients actually achieve those goals?
I think one of the most important things that dietitians can do, and that I try to practice, is really listening to the patients and understanding their whole story. So yeah, it's important to know what people are eating, but there's a lot of background information that's valuable for us to know. What is their work schedule? What is their sleep schedule? Who in the house takes care of food preparation? Is it them? Is it a carry-out restaurant? Is it another family member? So I think there's a lot of background information that we can gather as we begin to start the dialogue with the patient.
So basically, it boils down to some things that we have been teaching all along that just doesn't involve what's on your plate, but also all the other factors that go into actually providing the meal itself, whether it's the location, who does the shopping, who does preparation, who makes the decisions.
Yeah.
It's usually a mother.
Yeah. Sometimes, it's not uncommon for people to even say that nobody does any cooking in their house. That they rely heavily on dining out or fast food restaurants or gas stations and convenience stores. That's a reality for a lot of people.
Exactly. I had a kid who came in with a parent not too long ago and who actually thought that the dollar store was the only place that you could go and buy stuff, and because they would go and get a variety of things there. But here again, you mentioned fast foods, which is sort of like a nemesis for some communities, especially in the African American community. I call it the other AAA. It's available, okay, it's affordable, and it's advertised. That has made it successful. Yeah. That is something that we have not dealt with properly in communities of color. What are your thoughts behind an approach to deal with that type of issue when it comes to making good choices?
I think there's two ways to think about it. One way is the community approach. And so bringing nutrition education into those communities so that whether you're a child, whether you're a grandma, a senior, an adult, that you have the opportunity to learn about food and its impact on your health. But the other part of that is, especially when we think about children, is in the home. And the home is the first teaching place. And so, I think as adults or caretakers in the house, we need to realize that we are our biggest example for our children and for this next generation. And so making time, even if you can't cook on a daily basis, if that becomes a Sunday thing or a weekend thing, making time so that you can teach children or so they can see that that is actually part of living a healthy lifestyle.
So even down to mom dragging you in the kitchen and saying, I'm going to teach you how to cook.
Yeah, teach you how to cook. Even better, let me help you do something and be hands-on so that food doesn't always feel like a chore, but it has this fun element to it.
What particular foods have medicinal qualities? I mean, things that we can say, boy, this is better for you than that.
Yeah. So a simple way I think about is colorful foods. Foods that are naturally rich in color. And so these are going to be what we call our plant-based foods. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, peas, and lentils, nuts and seeds. They don't have all the glamour of some of those AAA things that you mentioned, but we know that internally they have a very powerful impact on the body because they have anti-inflammatory properties to them.
Now, I'm a product of the public school system, and we actually had things coming along like food pyramids that we would learn early on in elementary school. We had the ability to elect in those days to take cooking classes, and gym or physical education was a requirement. We seem to have gotten away from that in terms of our young folks' exposure. We need to bring that back and incorporate it into a lot of the things that we're doing, including the choices that we make for food intake.
One of the biggest challenges that I see, even with adult patients, is the fact that people don't have enough time to prepare their own foods, and this challenge of I'm not even quite sure how to make it. So not only do I not have enough time, but I don't even know necessarily what can I do with a head of cabbage that's going to taste good, or how do I cut a head of cabbage? How do I preserve cabbage so that it lasts longer in the refrigerator without spoiling faster? So, you mentioned education and education in the school system. Those are basic skills that I think a lot of people continue to be challenged with.
That's interesting because if you don't get it at home, where will you get it? I mean, you want to pick it up in the street? No. I mean, you see what kind of end results we get from that. So a lot of this needs to go back to basically what is taught in the home in terms of things like how do you cut a head of cabbage so it lasts longer in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah. So, what's taught in the home, what's taught in the community, what's taught in the schools, and then we know the internet. The internet is a big source of where people are getting their information. And, there's a lot of good information you can get on the internet. There's some information you need to be more cautious with, but simple things like that, there's a lot of resources that we can find in the internet and in libraries too.
Maria, we're going to take a break. Stay with us. We're going to continue our discussion with Maria Conley, registered dietitian nutritionist at the Henry Ford Healthcare System, right after this.
We women sure know a lot of numbers by heart. But do you know the most critical numbers for your heart health? That knowledge could save your life. Do you know your numbers? Talk to your healthcare provider today to learn your health numbers. Your heart depends on it.
Welcome back. We're here with Maria Conley, registered dietitian and nutritionist at the Henry Ford Healthcare System. Maria, how should foods really be prepared to give us the most effective way of fighting disease?
I think one thing to remember is cooking things low and slow. So I generally, whatever you can do to get more color into your diet from those plant-based foods, whether it's raw, whether it's roasted, whether it's sauteed or boiled into a soup, I think is suitable.
So mom leaving the crock pot on all night was a good thing to do then?
Very good thing, because research does show that when we tend to cook at high temperatures, things like grilling, sauteing, frying, that we actually increase the amount of, they call them glycotoxins, in that food, which therefore then increases inflammation in the body.
That's interesting because some of this is cultural. Well, no, a lot of this is cultural. I mean, that's why we have ethnic restaurants that people enjoy so well, but sometimes it's even more difficult. I have a cousin that practices medicine in a very high Hispanic population, and she says her real problem is changing the habits and the cultural aspect of refried beans, and
Yeah.
you know, I mean, she says it drives her crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I think we have to approach it with an open mind. I think as providers, we have to meet patients where they're at. And that may not happen in the first visit. That may have to happen in repeated visits, but beginning to show people that you respect their culture, that you're not asking them to abandon their culture in order to steer them 100% in your direction. So I think it's finding a meeting ground. And sometimes that is a slow process. For other patients who are very motivated, that can be something that happens faster. So, you know, sometimes with patients, we'll talk about, you know, maybe changing one ingredient. You know, maybe exploring finding some recipes out there, doing some homework. There's someone else who already came up with an awesome recipe for beans that may not require some type of high-fat animal product in it. Or, you know, substituting something such as a white pasta or a white rice for something like a brown rice. So there's things out there, we just, I think, sometimes have to be open-minded and let patients know that we're willing to meet them where they're at.
Which brings me to the African American diet, soul food. Tastes so good, but not good for us.
Okay.
I mean, there are a lot of issues there because it's not only cultural, it's become generational to a great degree. And the longer you do something, the harder the habit is to break. Mm-hmm. What are the challenges there?
Well, I think one of the challenges when we think from a food perspective is that foods that are high in salt, high in sugar, and high in fat, they stimulate the brain in the same way that other addictive behaviors or substances do.
So we're getting high on our food to a degree.
I think you could say that to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so being aware of that and starting to realize that we have to do something about it. That continuing to practice the same things, continue to cook the same way that we do and make the same food choices is going to allow the cycle to continue on and on.
So certain health conditions come to mind in terms of, you know, the patient has been a creature of habit for so many years, and now they're presenting, they've got particular problems. We're trying to fine-tune medications and incorporate diet and exercise into the whole thing. So basically, we have to talk about specifics in terms of disease states like diabetes, mm-hmm. like hypertension, like hyperlipidemia, that famous trio that we deal with. What are some of the educational approaches that should be taken to help people with those diseases?
From a nutrition perspective, I think we have to keep it simple. So communicate in a way that patients understand. A lot of times, one thing I like to do is use what we call the plate method. And so you actually think about a plate, a normal size plate, split it down in half down the middle, encourage half of that plate being filled with low starch vegetables.
But Maria, Mom told you to eat everything on your plate and clean plate club and everything. So now we got to flip the script and say, oh, no, cut the amounts, mm-hmm. okay? Put half of it back because you piled up your plate. I mean, it's a hard sell.
So I encourage patients, we know that, but we got to look at the big picture. How much are you exercising and moving in the day? Can you still afford to clean the plate? And to challenge that. That may have been suitable for maybe your childhood, but now as an adult, if you have these diseases and you have weight issues, you've got to begin to break out of that.
So it's a reevaluation mm-hmm. of what we do in terms of not only what we eat, the choices that we make, the amounts mm-hmm. that we choose to eat, incorporated with exercise and maybe a few other things mm-hmm. from an educational standpoint of view that goes along to do that. So we've got a monumental task. People love to eat in this country, okay? We eat because it's dinner time, not necessarily because we're hungry, mm-hmm. okay? Mm-hmm. So we've got a lot of challenges in terms of not just the population as a whole or a specific segment of society like the African American community, but that individual patient itself. So the encouragement that you guys are providing and that coaching has to be an integral part mm-hmm. of what we do. So, but you got to be doing a good job to get outcomes. Tell us about your approach and what you've seen in terms of the outcomes.
I think one of the biggest things I feel like people notice sooner than later is energy. You know, when you
feel better.
You know, the scale may not decelerate mm-hmm. very quickly as some people want.
The dress size may not have changed.
Right, but we know that there's a lot of other biomarkers that mm-hmm. are important to health. And sometimes we have to emphasize that with patients. It's not always about the number on the scale. Let's start to look at your A1C and see how that's beginning to shift down. Let's look at your cholesterol. Let's look at your triglycerides. And when they see those numbers, even if they may not be losing the weight that they have hoped they would have lost by that time, it's motivating. They start to realize, oh, there's something happening metabolically inside of me. That's a good thing.
Plant-based eating has gained a lot of attention. You spoke about it earlier in terms of the lineup of what people should be choosing. And in fighting diseases, you know, the old adage again was you are what you eat, which is very true. But there appears to be more healthcare benefits to a plant-based diet than anything else that we can choose out here.
Yeah, I think that message is becoming louder and louder. We know that, you know, we think about the American Diabetes Association, we think about the American Institute for Cancer Research, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. A lot of these governing organizations and health boards, we're seeing that if we start to look at some of their dietary recommendations, most of them, what they have in common is that diets that are centered around plant-based foods are always going to be promoted to enhancing our health.
Maria, doctors are now in some circumstances writing prescriptions for patients that can be used at places like farmers market. How is this catching on in urban areas?
So Henry Ford actually is involved in a program called Fresh Prescription. I don't work with that program directly, but I've been told that they actually have seen improvement in diabetes biomarkers like hemoglobin A1C.
That's interesting because the first thing that comes to mind is that who's going to fill the prescription? Well, it's not in the traditional sense. It's that it's a direction given to people who are actually saying, okay, this is what your doctor intends for you to have. And I think that's one of the things that needs to be cleared up with people because it's not going to be covered by insurance, that's for sure. Okay?
Right.
But
right.
Here again, it helps the patient make a better choice once they leave the office and arrive at the point of contact called the supermarket or the farmer's market.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And I think it helps to bring what happens in the clinic or in the hospital, and it helps the patient to connect the dots of when I leave there, you know, these are the places that I go to get access to healthy food. You know, these are the community resources, the community organizations that can be helpful to me.
The bigger problem in society seems to be time, okay? Not being educated, as in reading labels, okay? Not to mention the things that are unseen that are forced on us for the most part. Salt and sugar are ubiquitous in this society. Are we making any progress with manufacturers? Okay, 80% of the meat production in this country is controlled by 4 companies. Those sort of things. The sugar added to particular prepared foods that actually has upregulated our taste for things, and we may not actually get to the point where it's too sweet, but we expect it to be somewhere near that because we've been ingesting it for a long time. What's happening on the political end? Are we making any headway with the discussion and manufacturers and people who are actually controlling the food production and distribution in this country?
You know, I think as consumers, we do not realize how powerful our spending dollar is. You know, sometimes we wait for larger bodies to make changes for us, when really, every time we go to the grocery store, every time we go to the store and purchase something, that money that we're spending is influencing this whole food culture. And so I think, you know, the more often that we're going to spend our dollars with entities that we feel that our values align with them, or that we trust, or that we believe is going to help us meet some of our health goals, you know, that's a very powerful position to be in. And, you know, I think as consumers, we need to remember that we are essentially voting with our dollar.
Very, very good point. We're up against another break. We're going to take a small break and we'll be right back with more primary care.
As we stay home to do our part flattening the curve, it's important that we remember our personal mental well-being as well. Each day, create a schedule for yourself so your mind stays sharp and active. Be sure to set aside time to stretch, meditate, or exercise. And stay connected to others in new ways or old. It's little things like these that will keep us all strong and in the fight together. For the latest updates on COVID-19, visit uofmhealth.org.
Welcome back. We're here with Maria Conley, registered dietitian and nutritionist at the Henry Ford Health System. Maria, so how do you actually teach? How would one learn from you how to actually teach food as a medicine? I mean, healthy eating is always a problem, but how would you teach it to an at-risk population who has other socioeconomic factors that will interfere or prevent them from being successful?
Yeah. Well, we talk about it, like I had mentioned, the plate method, beginning just to educate people on, what are plant-based foods and what is their impact on their health, but then also showing it. And so there are some community programs out there where they have community cooking demonstrations, community cooking classes that specifically go into target, maybe at-risk populations or youth or adults with specific disease conditions.
Food deserts still remain a problem in urban communities, and a lot of people say, well, they really don't exist, but they really do exist because it's hard to eat healthy, it's expensive to eat healthy. What approaches are we using to actually tackle this? Because that has to be incorporated into the conversation.
Yes. One thing I want to say is expensive to eat healthy. I think it's the way we have to sometimes rethink the way that we're looking at that. We can take something like meat, think about how much it costs per pound, and compare it with another type of protein, like beans. There's a significant difference in there, and a lot cheaper actually to eat those beans as a protein source than meat all the time. So I think we have to sometimes reframe that. I think across the country, there's a lot of exciting work being done where we're having partnerships of churches, food pantries, community organizations, healthcare organizations who are partnering together to try and address issues such as hunger and food deserts in minority communities.
So you mentioned churches, which is another extension of the problem and to some degree in the African American community, because my estimation of churches in my community that serve meals, I mean, we're probably the worst because we want everybody satisfied with the taste. We give them a lot of food, so we want them full. I mean, too much fried, too much sugar additives. I mean, it goes on and on. And that's kind of an extension of the culture to some degree. I mean, but here again, it's an issue that has to be addressed.
Yeah. We need some wellness champions, and I think the church can be that. The nice thing about the church is it already is a place where people are congregating around food even. But I think it's also a place where people feel safe and secure, but that they actually trust the information they receive. And so I think the church can be a place that promotes health education, that can be a host site, even for something like cooking classes. And we do see that happen.
Yeah, we're seeing a shift. It's just not enough of a shift to make a difference. If food is going to act like a medicine, where does diet play a role in the particular diets? I mean, the Atkins, the Weight Watchers, Nutrisystem, I mean, it goes on and on. What diets would actually be beneficial? What diets do people avoid? What diets really have risk?
We got to be careful. We got to be careful with that. We know that the weight loss industry is a multi-million-dollar industry. Every day, every week, it sounds like there's a new dietary recommendation coming out. And it creates a lot of confusion. Something I remind patients is, when we receive information from the media or off the internet, especially if it's promoting some type of new diet, I tell them, do they know what your lab values are? Do they know your name? Do they know anything about your medical history? And so I think it's very important before people begin to embark on a new diet to discuss it with their healthcare provider, to discuss it with a dietitian, so that they can make sure that it's being personalized for their specific health.
Recently in the literature, there's been 2 or 3 articles about milk and dairy. As a registered dietitian, what's your position on adults consuming those products?
Oh, that's a very controversial topic.
It certainly is.
Because my opinion doesn't line up with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics.
We want to hear the primary care. No.
In our practice, we do encourage patients to decrease the amount of animal-based foods that they have in their diet. What I see is the more of that people consume, it tends to kind of take the spotlight away from a lot of the plant-based foods. And so specifically, when it comes to dairy products, we do encourage patients to minimize that and to also try and meet some of their calcium needs, some of their nutrition needs from other foods that are more plant-based.
You work with a lot of physicians. What is the role of the primary care provider in this whole arena of helping people make healthy choices?
So, I tell patients, look at them like the headquarters. That's your home base, that's your starting place. I think it's important for patients to work on building a relationship with their PCP. Let them know what your goals are, let them know what some of your motivations are. That way they can properly direct you through the health system and make, appropriate referrals for what some of your goals are.
Maria, where do you see this whole concept of food as medicine going forward?
I think it's going to continue to grow. I think there is an interest from consumers, who come in asking questions about diets or supplements or superfoods they may have heard in the media or on the internet. But then I think there's also an interest, internally when we think about, doctors who want to learn more about foods, who want to be able to better educate their patients on which foods to eat or how to connect them and refer them, to services that are offered inside the health system.
Maria, this has been outstanding. Thank you for joining us on Primary Care.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joe.
Our guest has been Maria Conley, registered dietitian, nutritionist at Henry Ford Health System. As a practicing physician, it's important to stress that diet alone cannot and should not replace medicine in all circumstances. While many illnesses can be treated, controlled, and even prevented with dietary and lifestyle changes, many others cannot. If you are looking to use food to fight sickness and disease, then it is vital that you first speak to your primary care provider and together work with a registered dietitian or nutritionist to develop a plan where potential risks and benefits are clearly defined and understood. That's all we have for today's show. Thank you for watching. For Primary Care, I'm Dr. Lonnie Joe.